There are a lot of people who've been waiting for 40 years for this day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't wish to deny anyone their celebration. I think if people want to celebrate, they should. I think if they want to ring Big Ben, they should. But what they can't do is pretend that it's a great moment of national unity. That I can't allow. I can't allow them to ride on this idea that by ringing Big Ben in the centre of a city that voted 60-40 to remain, in which there are 1.1 million people like me, EU27 migrants, for whom that bell is the death knell of our automatic rights. So 1 in 10 people walking by that bell ringing, it will mean that their automatic citizenship rights are ending at that moment. So what I can't allow them to do is to both organize the celebration and to pretend that it's a great moment of national healing. It's not. It's doing a big slide, in front of the opposition fans. In
football terms, which you get booked for.
There's a reason why there are celebrations that are appropriate, celebrations that are not. There's a reason why, the parades in Belfast have a particular route. So to come to the most Remainy place, literally in the UK, full of EU27 migrants for whom this is significant and catastrophic, and pretend that we're all together having a big celebration as if it's New Year's Eve, it's not true. It's just not true. Most people in this city will be deeply unhappy about what's going on.
I think you could also argue, using the same logic before, when we were told that actually in the 2017 election, the majority of the electorate voted for parties that wanted to respect the referendum result. If you take the same logic, if you take the 2019 election, the majority of the votes went to parties that were either seeking to stop Brexit or at least to give the country a second referendum. All the polls show that the country is still deeply divided, with Remain still edging it, although that's an argument for the past now because we are leaving on the 31st. Sam, can it be thought as sort of trying to rub Remainers' noses in it, a big celebration in Parliament Square? And also, does it say something about the Leave side, where I think this call to arms was put forward by Mark Francois to raise £500,000? I think they managed about 100,000 so far.
No, they're on 260,000.
260,000. So they're halfway there.
13,000 people have given their own money to it. Which I think is, it's significant. I completely do accept that half the country do not find this a point of celebration. Mm-hmm. And I would say that Number 10 actually have been absolutely ultra cautious, actually, about how to deal with this. They are really, really aware of how upset some people are about it. And they did not want to carry out a big party and make it a triumphalist occasion. So, I mean, you can have your opinions on the bongs and whether that's triumphalist or not. I would argue it isn't. It's the bell that marks the new year. It's the bell that marks armistice. Nobody says that's triumphalist.
We've been asking the question to our listeners, are celebrations on Brexit Day the best way to bring the country together? It's only fair to get an answer from yourself as well.
Well, I mean, personally, I think it would be appropriate if Big Ben was to chime at 11 p.m. on the 31st of January. Just less than 3 weeks ago, Big Ben was able to be chimed to ring in the new year, as it typically is. So I don't see why it should be such a burden for Big Ben to chime. Well, it's restoration work. But the broader point I think that you're making about whether it's divisive. This is actually celebrating, or would be celebrating, a democratic decision taken by the British people that was actually deferred by the very place that Big Ben is situated for 3.5 years against the will of the British people. So I do think it's important. And also, many other countries, I mean, I don't balk at the fact that on the 4th of July, the United States celebrates its independence from us.
But they do celebrate it. But they do. Hang on a minute.
How would you balk at that?
How would you? You remember, we don't own the United States anymore, Henry.
So gracious.
But Henry, let me ask you.
That's exactly the point. We don't. They chucked us out.
Yeah, but also you've got to acknowledge.
4th of July.
But you've got to acknowledge the fact that, in this general election, yes, Boris Johnson secured his mandate. Yes, he secured what some may call a landslide, and pretty close to a landslide, an 80 majority. But the majority of votes went to parties that either supported a second referendum or ending Brexit altogether. You cannot stand there as a Conservative MP and tell me that this is something that the country wants to celebrate as a union. It's not the same as the New Year's celebrations, because that's something that the country celebrates all together. Now, I personally don't have any issues with people having a celebration for Brexit Day, something that they wanted to happen for 40 years. I'm perfectly happy for them to celebrate. But the idea that ringing Big Ben somehow brings the country together, surely, Henry, you must acknowledge that that's not the way to bring the country together.
I think it's probably slightly indicative of the problem that there has been in recent years in this country, that we haven't been sort of outward-looking, we haven't been optimistic about the future. I think there's a very bright future for this country and this country's place in the world and the contribution that this country can make in the world. And I know it's probably very un-British to sort of celebrate what's good about our country in a sort of ironic way, but I really do think that Big Ben chiming, really shouldn't be such a controversial subject. We're leaving the European Union. We're following through on the democratic will, finally, of the British people, despite all the efforts to stop that by the establishment. And I just think that should be marked by the clock that is the nation's clock.
Most people out there aren't having these sorts of conversations. Most people are used to having friends they disagree with. Everyone's got a mate in a pub that talks rubbish, whether you think it's left-wing, right-wing or centrist. If people who vote different ways on Brexit and can get on with each other, I mean, that's normal life. And also, I think one of my favourite things in the world is talking to someone I disagree with. I get a genuine buzz out of it, because you think either I'm going to reinforce my own view and think, actually, I am right because I can't agree with that. Or you go, oh, maybe I'm wrong about that. And then, so you either improve your existing opinion or you move to a position.
Or you change your mind,
yeah,
which is actually quite a welcome thing.
Yeah.
I've got to ask you some of these questions because we've had loads of them coming in. I can't avoid it much longer. Before we talk about your tour that's coming up, so some of the, I suppose, a lot of people when they think about you, think about Matt Forde and your association with the Labour Party, they will attach the Blairite name to you. So Jonathan wants to know: do you still stand by Blairism?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think that's where most people are. And Blairism is, to my mind, classic Labour values of invest more in schools and hospitals. Effectively, it's about equality of opportunity, accepting that Britain is, for all its, and firstly, loving the country is a good starting point, liking Britain, but secondly, acknowledging the problems that we have here. Inequality is a serious problem. Where you're born does determine your outcomes, and that's not fair. And that's not just a moral issue. That makes us economically ineffective, because you're not unlocking the talent out there that would make this country an even more dynamic, wonderful place. So it's about giving people a decent start in life, but also that comes with responsibilities. So, for instance, being tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime was a fundamental tenet of Blairism that I agree with. Being strong on security and strong on defence as well.
But what about people who would criticise? Okay, you mentioned it earlier, and of course, every time you mention Tony Blair, you're going to get the Iraq war come up. But let's set that aside for just one moment. But for example, a lot of people will tell you that we are where we are with the economy, with the fact that we've got underfunded schools and the NHS, because Tony Blair came to a point, and I'm going to be hugely simplistic at the moment, of, right, we don't want to raise taxes to pay for, social projects, putting money in infrastructure. We're going to go cap in hand in the city and say, I tell you what, private funding, you guys can fund national projects, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what's got us into trouble where we are now. So what about that side of Blairism?
I just disagree with that. I mean, part of the reason why... it's important to remember the vast majority of money that was... the amount of cash put into the NHS and into our schools and public services under Tony Blair is historic. And when you look at any graphic now about funding... When people say it was a continuity Tory government, for instance... the money Labour was spending on schools, hospitals and police, some people would say was spending too much on it. Now, some of that, the vast majority of that was taxpayers' money. Some of it was private finance initiative. And the reason why you had PFI wasn't out of some sort of Tory plot to be right-wing. It was because you couldn't build capacity fast enough in the NHS. And what was the best use of money? How do you save? And it's important to remember the reason why you invest in the NHS isn't just out of ideology. It's to keep people alive, to keep people healthy, to make sure that people aren't sat in A&E for hours and hours and hours bleeding out. This is like a fundamental decency in the country. So most of it comes from taxpayers' money. Some of it came from the private sector. It was all free at the point of use. No patient or student had to go and pay for the state education or for their state healthcare. So I think it's just one of those things. People, if you disagree with Tony Blair from a left-wing perspective, you're constantly trying to find evidence that he's a Tory, and that's one of those things that people kind of always think is a kind of aha. But what about PFI? You think, well, he was trying to get money into schools and hospitals quick to make sure that people had better lives.
Okay, Sam says, and I think these are to your previous comments about Ed Miliband changing the rules around the Labour leadership election. So Sam's asked, so should members of the public not be able to vote for their Labour leader? What's your view on that?
Well, I just think as long as your values are consistent with Labour values, then fine. But my view is that
should there be a vetting process that Labour before they accept a member?
Yeah, and there kind of is. You know, if people raise concerns, then I mean, I think probably part of the problem now is because of where the Labour Party has shifted to. People like me might be judged not to have the aims and values of the Labour Party. So I would probably be now victim of my own idea, yeah.
Rejected from joining the Labour Party. Let's talk a little bit about the Labour leadership campaign at the moment. Has anybody caught your eye? I think I could probably guess who you don't want to win. But let's stay away from the negatives and go to the positives. Has anybody caught your eye?
I think Jess Phillips is brilliant. And I've been a big fan of hers since she's only been around for about 5 years, and has had a huge impact in that time. So I really like her. I really like Keir Starmer. I have to say,
you've interviewed all of them.
Yes, and I'm interviewing Lisa Nandy on the podcast in a couple of weeks. And I think just in terms of ability, I think they've all got great strengths.
Do you think Jess Phillips? I mean, just because I know I've got to take a break in a second, but do you think Jess Phillips has got the experience needed? I mean, someone like Keir Starmer has had the experience of running a big organisation. Emily Thornberry has been a shadow foreign secretary. Does Jess Phillips have the experience needed? And also another comment is that she tends to... I mean, it's lovely that she's very passionate, and we've all seen some wonderful speeches that she... But also getting very passionate very quickly might be misinterpreted as losing your rag very quickly.
I think once people become leaders, they grow into the role often. And of course, she doesn't have the experience of running a large organisation in the way that Keir Starmer has, but she's got experience of changing people's lives for the better. And crucially, she's got the ability to take the Labour Party to a position where it can win. And that is the number one test of any leader is, can they win an election for the Labour Party? That is the single most important attribute they need. Now, I think she's the sort of person that can win a general election. I think Keir Starmer probably could. I think Lisa Nandy probably could. I think there's a lot of talent.
But isn't the reality, I know I've been pushed for a break, but I want to get this out. Isn't the reality, I mean, we are looking at Labour in the next general election needing a bigger swing than Tony Blair got in 1997. We are talking about them starting to win in Scotland. We are talking about them, I think it's 114 seats. They need to gain right now to have a majority of one. Yeah. I mean, it's a monumental task. So logic dictates that you're going to have Lib Dems vote for Labour. You're going to have a lot of Conservatives switch their vote for Conservative. Do you think that Conservative voters can switch and vote for someone like Jess Phillips or Lisa Nandy?
Yes, I do. Not in enough numbers maybe at the next election, but politics is volatile, so who knows?
Of course, yeah.
In reality, it probably is a two-term project. And who knows when there's elections? You know, no one would have thought a few years ago we'd have had 3 general elections in 4 years or whatever it's been, and 2 referendums. So it's about putting Labour on the correct path as quickly as possible. And I think Jess Phillips and Lisa Nandy and Keir Starmer, I mean, they all have great strengths, and I think there's something to like about all the different candidates. And Emily Thornberry has strengths as well.
Rebecca Long-Bailey?
Rebecca Long-Bailey. You know, you can find positives for Rebecca Long-Bailey. She wouldn't be my number one candidate. But I don't think she wins an election for Labour at any point.